We'll move to item 15, and Kathy will move that particular item, and I will second, so we can put it on the table. Before we end up going to this item, I just wanted to acknowledge Councillor Sharon Stewart. We have been corresponding over the last couple of days in regards to this particular item. Now, so then that I can be transparent, Councillor Watson put in an amendment in regards to further consultation, and also just to have a look in regards to 9R 40-foot lane. I obviously sought advice from our governance and democracy team, and I have relayed during the lunch break the decision, and that is that it is both a direct negative and is out of the scope of the committee, because our scope in this particular item and for all revocations is to decide whether the reserve status will be revoked or not. So I have relayed that to Councillor Stewart, and I will give her the opportunity once the staff have given their report to ask partai, but more importantly, she'll be the first to start our whakaaro off, and then I will allow Councillor Young, if he wishes, to follow Councillor Stewart in regards to any comments that he wishes to make. So I just wanted to do that. And so, Councillor Stewart, when we get to partai questions or even whakaaro, I will definitely give you that opportunity to explain the conversations that you and I have had. And but I wanted to at least put this recommendation on the table, and our staff will end up discussing it. So I'm going to go to Carl if he could introduce the team in regards to this particular item. Kia
Ngā mihi o te wā ki a koutou, ko Eke Panuku Mahiaho, ko Carl May toku ingoa. I am a portfolio specialist in the strategic asset optimization team, and I have been leading the process for the reserve revocation of these properties in East Auckland. I've come slightly mob-handed today. With me, coming to you from cyberspace, are, and in no particular order, Letitia Edwards, who is the head of strategic asset optimization at Eke Panuku, Anthony Lewis, senior advisor portfolio review at Eke Panuku, also Julie McKee, who is the hearings manager in the democracy and engagement team at Auckland Council, and Grace Elisieva, who is a senior solicitor in the public law team at Auckland Council. If any of you decide to bowl any Googlers, I will no doubt be deferring to their greater experience and expertise in these matters. The purpose of this report is to present the recommendations of the independent commissioners following a public hearing, and to seek approval to submit a request to the Minister of Conservation to uplift the reserve status of 2R Tirako Drive, Pakuranga, 72R Karaka Road, Beachlands, and 9R 40-foot lane, Sunny Hills. Also to note that we recommend that the committee accept the recommendation of the independent commissioners not to proceed with the reserve revocation of 111R Golfland Drive in Howick, and to note that work to investigate the independent commissioners' recommendations regarding 76R Aberfeldy Avenue is ongoing and will be reported to the committee at a later date. So to kick off with some background, a quick refresher. Auckland Council's Finance and Performance Committee approved the subject sites for disposal on the 16th of July 2020 and on the 17th of September 2020 as part of the emergency budget. These sites had been identified by council staff prior to the emergency budget as no longer required for reserve purposes. This was on the basis that properties did not meet the criteria set out in council's open space policies. Following the resolution, Eke Panuku, on behalf of council, has undertaken iwi notification according to Section 4 of the Conservation Act 1987, and public notification under Section 24 of the Reserves Act 1977 for these reserves. Due to the volume of submissions received, independent commissioners were appointed to consider the submissions. A hearing was held for these reserves in February 2022 before two independent commissioners, one with Reserves Act expertise and the other with specialist knowledge in the area of kaupapa Māori. The submissions were considered at these hearings, and all submitters were invited to present their submissions at the hearing, and the relevant local boards were also invited to present their views. In their report, the commissioners recommend, I'll just go through them property by property. 72R Karaka Road, the commissioners unequivocally supported the proposed reserve revocation. 2R Turakau Drive, the commissioners stated that council had to be satisfied that the reserve is not required for servicing, i.e. public access purposes, as part of the redevelopment of Pakuranga Plaza before the revocation proceed. Staff can advise the committee that the reserve at 2R Turakau Drive is bounded on three sides by legal road. Now, sorry, Maya, I think we have a slide deck. Not to worry.
No, it's just coming up, Carl.
Yes,
so just
my bad. I should have requested that right at the start.
no, that's all right. She's just getting it up for you. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Maya. Can we please go down a couple of slides to Turakau? Lovely. So here we are, a lovely aerial shot of Pakuranga Plaza, and it shows the location of the two parcels of land that form the reserves at 2R Turakau Drive. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yes, so we can advise that, as you can see, 2R Turakau Drive is bounded on three sides by legal road. And as you can see from this this map, this plan, the reserve is not required now or in the future for access purposes. The owners of the petrol station, as you can see in the photographs, that sits slap bang in the middle of the two parcels of land, but also the owners of Pakuranga Plaza. They are both obvious potential purchasers. So if the reserve status is uplifted, Eke Panuku will explore disposal options with both potential purchasers. Could I move to the next slide, please? Forty-foot lane. The commissioners agreed that the reserve did not meet most of the open space assessment criteria, and they agreed that in terms of a rationalised portfolio, this reserve was a reasonable candidate for revocation. However, they recommended that council discuss options for the establishment of a community trust or similar to manage and control this reserve for the general public. Auckland Council's Service and Asset Planning team has considered the options for the establishment of a community trust to manage and control this reserve. The team has advised that under the Reserves Act 1977, only the Crown can appoint a voluntary organisation, board or trust to control and manage reserve land, and then only if it is vested in the Crown. This property was vested in the Crown for a period of 2 months in 1961. It was subsequently vested in Manukau County Council under the Counties Amendment Act 1961, so there is no underlying Crown ownership. So the Act, there is no provision in the Act for us to do this. If council were to enter into a lease with a voluntary organisation, ownership would remain with council. This is not supported, and this was confirmed in discussions with Auckland Council's Land Advisory Services. Moving on, I'd like to have the next slide, please. Before I go on to Golflands Drive, I'll just like to just note 76R Aberfeldy Avenue. The Commissioner's recommendation was that a crossing over Aviemore Drive to Lloyd Ellesmere Park be upgraded to make it safer and therefore more accessible before revocation proceeds. So Eke Panuku is working with AT to investigate this particular recommendation and will report at a later date. 111R Golflands Drive. The Commission has found that this reserve is capable of further development for a range of passive and active activities. It is located in an area clearly planned for intensification. The site serves a local recreation and utility purpose and functions in a way that alternatives could not. Therefore, they have recommended that the reserve status not be revoked on this reserve. That concludes my summary. Thank you for listening, and I and the team are ready to field questions.
Kia ora. So thank you, Carl. And I'm just waiting to see if there's any pātai because, as I said earlier, if not, I will be asking Councillor Stewart. Matua Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Is Crown title under any of these properties?
No.
So none of them are vested in the Crown.
If they were vested in the Crown, we would have needed a special. We would have needed to consult with DOC beforehand, but we wouldn't proceed with underlying Crown ownership.
No, thank you for that. Because I'm aware that the purpose of this is just about the reserve status. So I just wanted to understand that. Thank you.
Ka pai matua. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So hi, Carl. I've just got a question about the 40-foot lane reserve, and it goes to the intent of the recommendation or the request on the part of those commissioners, and without recollecting the precise words, I think the intent was that there be some opportunity for community engagement in the upkeep of the reserve and so on. That's what I pick up from it.
The community has been engaged in that we've held the public consultation under Section 24 of the Reserves Act. We have appointed commissioners to consider the submissions, and in fact we have gone over and above the requirements of Section 24 by holding a public hearing. There is no requirement to hold a public hearing for a reserve revocation, the Section 24 process under the Act.
Sure. Could you just read out what that comment was or recommendation was that the commissioners made, you referred to?
The commissioners agreed that the reserve did not meet most of the open space assessment criteria.
Yep, got that.
Okay. They recommended that council discuss options for the establishment of a community trust or similar to manage and control the reserve for the general public.
Okay. So my question is around the intent there, and the intent was obviously around engagement and the reference to management and control. And my question goes like this. There are any number of reserves that come to my mind, very, very large numbers, where you've got facilities on those reserves, in some instances owned by the community, often leased to the community. Also, many schemes involving custodial relationships around reserves that go to planting and maintenance. I can think of any number of reserves around that. And we actively encourage that, because the council doesn't have the capacity to actually look after a lot of its reserve spaces. Is it conceivable that we could have an arrangement around this reserve that does go to a relationship with the community that might enhance the upkeep of the reserve on the part of the community? That could involve things, for example, like tree planting. There could be other forms of maintenance. There are many reserves I'm familiar with where people in the community actively do stuff on reserves over and above the call of duty. Is that possible?
I think that would be a question for Auckland Council's Parks and Open Spaces team. I will just observe that yes, people do lease parts of reserves. They do own assets on reserves, but that is not the same as owning the reserve itself, as being appointed to control the reserve, or transferring title. I mean, to transfer the title, the reserve status would have to be uplifted.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, I am not suggesting in any respect the transfer of the title. I am not suggesting either a lease, though we do lease parts of reserves. We do that all over the place. What I am suggesting and questioning is, have we explored the opportunity of some form of engagement with the community that might work for the community in terms of the retention and enhancement of the reserve, and would also work for council in respect of reducing some of the cost to council of maintaining the reserve? Have we explored any arrangement with the community? Carl?
I would simply say the answer is no, because council has resolved, the Finance and Performance Committee has resolved that it no longer wishes to keep this land. And this was identified as being no longer serve its purpose through council's own processes.
Sure, I understand that, Carl. Having said that, I also note that this particular reserve did tick quite a number of boxes in a circumstance where it ticks an additional box, and that might go to the maintenance on the part of the community, the involvement of the community. That position might alter. That's my understanding, Mr. Chair. I may be correct. I did listen to the earlier summation around this particular reserve. Yep.
So just to get some clarification here, our team, our parks team, was asked, and they said no, it is not going to happen in regards to any arrangement. And as I said earlier, any recommendation around that is going to be out of scope for this particular committee. If anything needs to happen, something needs to go back to the Finance and Performance Committee. We will be dealing and only dealing with the revocation of the reserve status, and that's how I will be doing this particular item moving forward. So this is why, as I said to Councillor Stewart, this is why I will not be putting the amendment, because it's out of the scope and a direct negative. So, okay. Councillor Watson.
Supplementary question, Alf?
I'll go through to Councillor Watson. I will come back to you, Councillor Walker.
Okay,
trust
I hadn't finished. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's right. I just want to give other people an opportunity, and I'll definitely come back to you. No problems at all. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, so a couple of questions on some of the content of the report, and I'm two quite specific and one more generalised that go to some of the attachments here. And the first one just kind of goes to the currency of some of the comments that were made. So I noted in respect of the hearing panel, for instance, when they were, addressing the issue of concerns with, the loss of open space and, higher development thresholds, etc., that they made reference to 40-foot lane, but the other properties too, in fact, of being residential, mixed housing, suburban. Now, all that zoning is going to be superseded with this medium density standard through the national policy statements, isn't it? So just to get that clear, that all these properties will be essentially mixed housing urban very soon as a consequence of the planning procedures that are going through and will be put out for consultation in August.
I don't think that covers the whole of these areas. Some of the areas around transport hubs, that is true.
Yeah.
But I would have to defer to a planner for that.
Yeah, there's a big difference between mixed housing suburban and mixed housing urban, and mixed housing suburban is all but disappearing under the government proposals. So I think that's useful in terms of some of the commentary that was made in respect of the submissions. It's actually a more intensive future that these areas, and in fact all of Auckland's looking at. The second question I wanted to go to was in respect of the commentary that, and I'm talking again of 40-foot lane, and this is an attachment A, that the park lacks amenity, and I'm assuming there the amenity is defined in terms of, you know, maybe seats or kids' playgrounds. I just want to canvass, and this might be the parks people who are best suited to answer this, that the notion of amenity differs in terms of what activities taking place there. So, for instance, I understand through the submission process there was quite extensive reference to, you know, local kids and whatnot playing games of cricket, kicking balls around and stuff like that. That amenity is actually enabled by open space like this of, you know, of some 2,000 square meters, which isn't enabled in other more confined areas where you've got seats and playgrounds and all the rest of it. So I guess my question at the end of all that is that in terms of the amenity for that sort of activity, which is obviously taking place currently, then 40-foot lane actually does provide that opportunity. It's a different sort of amenity, but it's an important amenity, and arguably more important now with the intensification coming up. Did anyone draw that distinction?
I think I would just simply state that we are managing the reserve revocation process. The way the open space is assessed for the reserve revocation is, does it meet the values of the Reserves Act? The Parks and Open Spaces team assessed the reserve and concluded that it did not.
Okay, so I guess that's a debating point that I'll return to in my speech, because obviously, you know, the community, the local board and the local councillors disagree on that, but that's to be continued elsewhere. My final question goes to one of the recommendations of the hearing panel in respect of that process that the public went through, and the you know, the commissioners Hiller and Morrison encapsulated in their hearing report, and it goes to this kind of notion of public perception and transparency in respect of Panuku's involvement. So they made some recommendation there that the kind of the combination of Panuku, you know, being the wing of council that disposes of assets, then being involved leading out in this process is a contradictory one, that there should be some separation. Now that is a comment that has been made previously in terms of the public perception, and you know, and in respect of some quite lengthy and detailed investigative reports. Is there any awareness of that, and what's your response to that? Because I think that's a very important point that have been made in that recommendations of the hearing panel.
Well, I think that's rather outside the scope of my report, which is simply dealing with the recommendations as regards the reserve revocation and not council policy.
Okay, so I see a lot of heads nodding. So at what point? Then...
Sorry, hold on. Just Letitia, I'll just let Councillor Watson finish, and I will give you the opportunity to speak. So I'll just let Councillor Watson finish.
Yeah. So
future, I assume there will be a significant flow of money to the council for reserve purchases, some of which will need to be spent in this vicinity. And again, I point out that we have had no response from council in respect of what those future requirements are. With respect to amenity, as Councillor Watson has pointed out, this area has significant amenity. It also has the particular advantage from council's point of view, and I'm applying CPTED principles, crime prevention through environmental design, that it is overlooked by a number of properties, and I would suggest is a relatively safe place and pleasant place for people to use. That is often not the case in many areas. So I would hope that the majority of councillors and independent members around this table would give some support to Councillor Sharon and her contention, rather than the opposite, against a basis where the opposite does not appear to be at all informed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I've got Councillor Young, and if there's nobody else, I will close the debate.
Just comment. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Rich is tooth and the land is money. This is an old saying from the Asian community for last couple of thousand years. We all know the land value and will be more precious in the future. In 2020, we approved the emergency budgets, which include assets recycling to cope with COVID and the financial challenge. I was supportive of this approach in January, and in some cases, the cost of maintaining unused public land for the benefit of only a few is not the wise use of repair funding. We also needed revenue to deliver those projects are long overdue, such as $1.4 billion Eastern Busway and the planning for the airport to Botany rapid transit project. However, in 2020, I could not support the disposal of the reserves at 40-foot lane, Golf Lane Drive, and Aberfield Drive. These reserves are treasured by the community, and our local parks are our connection to the nature and the well-being. They are particularly important as Auckland moves to a higher housing density to support our growth. I'm glad to see our commissioners reject the Golf Lane Drive and have a request more work for Aberfield Drive. This is a good result. However, I encourage my fellow councillor to vote to save 40-foot lane also. We do need to look to the long-term health and well-being of our city. A huge thank you to the outstanding community groups who get together to protect what is important to land for now and the future, as well as my fellow councillor and the local board members who have done the same. I would also like to thank our professional staff in the hearing teams, in particular Julie Marquis, for dealing with this sensitive matter so professionally, as well as Iku Panuku and the independent commissioners for such tough work. Kia ora, Chair. 谢谢.
Thank you, Constable Young. Thank you, Councillor Young. I'm going to close this debate. And look, we've been here. I don't know how many times we've been here. We have been here since 2020 when the emergency budget came into place. Where were the people then? I didn't see them anywhere. Where were they then? Yes, the local board. I know that the local board ended up not supporting the reserve revocation. Understand that. I also understand because the councillors within the area would be advocating for the same thing. But there have been so many properties that have been sold as a result of this emergency budget, and that process needs to continue. This was at the agenda for the PACE committee in April, and as a result of the recommendations that the commissioners did, they ended up putting in there that there has to be a community trust, but it was a suggestion and a recommendation that we could look at it. Guess what? We put that off for 2 months for our staff to end up having to look at whether that in case could happen. But one of the key things was going to the manager for our commissioners, our hearings panel, and we were told that they could not make that recommendation. But at least when it was decided to put it off for the 2 months, that was the reason why. We also found out that our staff had spoken to the staff of the Minister of Conservation, and they were not prepared to also end up entertaining a trust looking after this property. We know why all these properties had to be put on the list of emergency because of the situation. Has our situation improved? No, it hasn't. It hasn't improved. It has gone through the process. The commissioners ended up saying that, look, yes, we should remove it, and maybe you could consider this. Well, I'm going to support the commissioner's recommendation in regards to removing the reserve status. I'm going to support that. And I'm hoping that the colleagues around this table online will support that as well. When we ended up having to look at when people start talking about what could possibly put in place, our staff was spoken to around what the situation is with it. And that is that no, it is not required. As a result, the only thing that we are dealing with in regards to this item is the removal, the revoking of the reserve status. And that is the only recommendation that we will end up putting through here. And that's the mandate for this committee. I cannot and will not end up putting in any recommendation or even saying that this is what we should end up doing when I know that is not the mandate of this committee. Councillor Stewart, and we spoke about this, Councillor Stewart can end up going through and getting the recommendation revoked herself from the Finance and Performance Committee, and I wish her luck in that. But this was passed 2 years ago. We needed to do it, and this is what the situation is going to happen. And I've got a division here for D&E, so I'm asking that this committee support. The only thing that we can do here is to remove the reserve status. There is still an option for the councillor and the 2 councillors and getting support of their colleagues. They still have the option of getting the recommendation of the Finance and Performance Committee 2 years ago. They still have the option to get that revoked. I'm suggesting that you do that. If you want to end up getting that recommendation revoked, well then rely on your colleagues around this table. But at the moment, for this particular committee, it is around removing revoking the reserve status, and that is what I'll be putting. So as a result, I'm asking Councillors Stewart and Young, who would be advocating, if the people on this particular item have spoken about, look, we got to support them. Well, you support them when you end up getting the notice of motion to revoke the recommendation at Finance and Performance. Then we'll see whether you'll get the numbers. But that's me. I'm telling you, you would do it that way, not at this particular point. This is around the revoking of the reserve status. So I have division on D and E. So I'm just going to go back to our team, Maya and Sonia, to end up putting it through with the division on D and E. Kia ora. Yeah, so Maya, if we could do that.
Okay.
We'll put everything, just to let everybody know, we're going to put everything on voices except for D and E.
So we're doing the division. The division is on. Sorry, can you move that?
Can we put? Sorry, Mike. Can we put everything else except D and E?
Yes.
We'll do that, but we put the on voices for everything else except D and E, and we'll do division on that. Yeah, on division. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Oh, here's me asking, looking at Maya, say you say it, and there's no, it's your job. Oops. So look, I'm going to put everything on voices except for D and E, and they will be done via division. So all the others except D and E, all those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against? That's passed. And then division on D and E. Maya.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, division on D and E is on the screen, 9R 40-foot lane, Sunny Hills. Mayor Goff,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore,
Aye.
Chair Filipina,
Aye.
Deputy Chair Casey, Councillor Bartley. Yes, thank you. Yes, against, sorry. Councillor Bartley is against. Councillor Collins.
For.
For. Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Fletcher.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Mulholland.
Against.
Councillor Newman. Just put it as nothing. Councillor Sayers.
Against. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
Against.
Councillor Watson.
Against.
Councillor Young.
No.
I'll just go back and check. Councillor Newman, are you online? Okay, I'll just leave it. Oh, IMSB member Kaki, my apology. He's left. IMSB member Wilcox.
For.
Thank you. You need to do Daniel. Doesn't know. Thank you. Can you scroll up a bit? Thank you. That's carried 11 votes to 7. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, thank you. We'll now move to the next item. And that is item 16, the ongoing management of motorised vehicles. I will move that and second Councillor Cashmore, Deputy Mayor. Before we do